Okay, here's our last type of interaction for the term. So mutualism. Now, mutualism means that we have interaction between individuals of different species that will benefit both partners. There are several ways to look at this. One is the facultative mutualism. That occurs when a species can live without its mutualistic partner, or an obligate mutualism, which occurs when a species is dependent on a mutualistic relationship. A good example of this one, let me try a different color there. A good example of this one would be a lichen. So you have a fungus and an alga, and often you'll never find them without each other. A facultative mutualism, the organisms can live without their mutualistic partner. Might be, say, some of your gut bacteria, maybe they could live without you. On the other hand, you need a lot of these gut bacteria, your so-called intestinal microbiome, in order to be healthy. And they're finding numerous ways that this is important to human health. Plant performance is kind of interesting in association with mycorrhizal fungi, and this has only been discovered recently. There's several types of these. There's an arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which produces arbuscules, which is a site of exchange between plants and the fungi. Now, the hyphae of the fungus, the filaments, and the vesicles serve as energy storing organs. The ectomycorrhizae forms a mantle around the roots, and they're important in increasing plant access to various nutrients, particularly phosphorus. So you'll notice the two types there. Allen studied the water relationships of a grass, and they found that the plants with the mycorrhizae maintained higher levels of leaf water potentials. They had greater access to phosphorus, and their roots may be more efficient at extracting and conducting water. So the mycorrhizae are very important. And this discovery has only come about, say, within the last, maybe 20, 30 years. So when I took ecology, nobody talked about this. Hardy suggested that mycorrhizal fungi improve water relationships by providing more extensive contact with the moisture in the root zone and allow for extra area for water reabsorption. So here you can see the roots, and then all these little fuzzy things would be the mycorrhizae. Johnson investigated whether fertilization can select for less mutualistic mycorrhizal fungi. So in his study, the fungal partner received an equal or greater quantity of photosynthetic product in trade for low quantities of nutrients. In nutrient-poor environments, many plants invest disproportionately in the roots, so find higher root investment in lower nitrogen soils. So the fungus is getting something out of this too. The plant photosynthesizes and consequently shares some of that product with the fungus. The results have suggested that mycorrhizae fungi from unfertilized soils supplied plants with many more nutrients. The plants were able then to invest more energy in the above ground part for more photosynthesis. Andropogon, which is bluegrass, produces flowers, it's inflorescent, only in nitrogen supplemented treatments they found. So here's an example of that research, the experimental study. So we have unfertilized soil, we have fertilized soil, and then you can see the treatments. So they had sterilized some of these, and then they fertilized them. They didn't have any mycorrhizae, and mycorrhizae from unfertilized soil, and they compared the growth of the roots and the shoot ratios, the number of inflorescences in this study. Herbivores that attempt to forage on acacia plants that are occupied by acacial ants are met by large numbers of fast, highly aggressive defenders. So the plants actually are protected from being eaten by these ants. Now the ants live in the thorns of these plants, so that's a living space. And then the plant produces nectaries, which provide sugar to the ant. And then they also produce some structures called Belton bodies, which are a source of oils and protein. And you can check out that video for examples here. So here you can see that the ants in this acacia, their relationship, and notice the acacia had much better growth when it had ants than without ants. Jansen, who we mentioned before, showed that ants significantly improved plant performance. The acacias without ants had more herbivorous insects growing on them, and the suckers growing from acacia stumps occupied by the ants lengthened at 7 times the rate of suckers without ants. Now a sucker, let's say you have the plant, and here's the stem or the trunk maybe. So a sucker will grow up like this. And think of a good example of those around here would be crepe myrtles. They produce lots of suckers. Ants are also attracted to aspen sunflowers because they produce nectar at extrafloral, outside the flower, nectaries. And they found that those nectaries are rich in sucrose and amino acids, so the ants are getting a really good boost there. And these are excellent ways to attract the ants and keep them living with you, and they help protect the plants. The ants probably protected the sunflowers developing seeds from predators that might want to eat those seeds. And the flowers without the ants suffered many more times, 2 to 4 times more seed predation. Now this is a facultative relationship because the flowers don't have to have the ants, and vice versa, because every few years the flowers are killed by an early frost, and then the ants have to go their own way. So here's an example of what you might see there. So notice on the left you see the number of flower heads, and then you see the year, and notice when the frost, late or early, did in the population. A great example of this kind of mutualism is the relationship between corals and the algae, the zooxanthellae, which live in the coral tissues. And if the coral don't have those, then they're in bad shape. Every once in a while, for whatever reason there might be, maybe the water's too hot or something, the coral gets sick and they expel the zooxanthellae. These zooxanthellae actually live in the tissues of the coral, these algae, and the corals will spit these out, and we will see bleaching occur. So the coral would turn kind of white, and often they die. Now sometimes they may recover, but often they die, and this is probably a big problem with the ocean warming up. And corals like to live at certain temperatures. So the corals get some organic compounds that the algae produce during photosynthesis, and then the corals release organic compounds that will be traded off to the algae. Corals can control the rate of these algae production and their density by the secretions that they produce. And there's a video you can watch to see this. So here's some data from a researcher named Glenn, and he found 13 coral species are protected by crustacean mutualists. Okay, the example here, pistol shrimp and crabs, and you can see with and without the crustaceans, the predation rate on the coral. So there's a big contrast there between the two. Try black, okay. A big contrast between these two, with and without the mutual. That's just a picture of a crown of thorns starfish, which is a nasty predator on coral. This guy has been introduced to areas where he shouldn't be, and he's really a dangerous predator on coral. So some of these crustaceans may protect it from this crown of thorns starfish. The crab activity helps somehow in producing healthy coral. They think that the coral increases the production of fat bodies when there are crabs present. And the digestive tract of crabs inhabiting the corals show large quantities of lipids, so maybe the coral are feeding the crabs to keep them there. So theory predicts that mutualism will show up wherever the benefits exceed the cost. So Keeler developed some models to represent the relative cost and benefits of several types of mutualistic reactions. So if they're going to be successful, they must give and receive benefits. If they're not successful, they may give but not receive benefits. So you can see this here on this example. The non-mutualists neither give nor receive benefits, and so the fitness must be due to some kind of advantage. Keeler also proposed that a facultative ant-plant mutualism, if evolves and persists, some portion of the energy budgets from the ants save the plant from destruction by herbivores, and that must exceed the proportion of the plant's energy. That should be plants right there. A little typo. Plants energy budgets invested in the extrafloral nectaries and the nectar. So it's got to work for both partners, and the cost can't exceed the benefits, otherwise it will not evolve. So conditions that may produce higher benefits than cost. Well, a low proportion of the plant's energy invested in the extrafloral nectaries, a high probability of attracting ants, low effectiveness of alternative defenses, and highly effective ant defenses. So it has to work in that order. So there we have a pistol shrimp, and you can take a look at him on that video. This is a coral that the shrimp is living on. And that's all for this one.